going to be talking about 9 players that are skyrocketing up our fantasy football rankings. Dave, I want to throw it to you first because this is a guy that we've talked very little bit about, but both of us, and Julia, we'll get to you in a second, but I think we're both kind of high on this running back.
Yeah, Joe Mixon isn't a guy that I expected to be drafting in the year 2024. If you look at his efficiency profile, everything has been trending down for years. But I think that this change of scenery that he has going into Houston now, it's going to be a good thing for him. When you look at Joe Mixon, he's been in the league for a while now. He's getting up there in age. Like we joked about, 28 years old for a running back is pretty much the end of the road. But he's never a guy that's really won on his athleticism or anything like that. His best skill set, especially at this point in his career, is his ability to read defenses and to display patience. And when you look at what they are running here in Houston, they've got this wide zone run scheme where they want to get their blockers out in space. And what you need to have as a running back, you need it between the ears and you need to have that patience. And that's why if you look last year, I saw Dameon Pierce really struggled because he has a kind of bull in a china shop type of play style. He didn't have that patience. Meanwhile, we saw Devin Singletary, who's small and unathletic, look really, really good in this offense. So I think this change of scenery is going to be really good for Joe Mixon. The whole time he was in Cincinnati, love it or not, it was not always pretty, but he was a consistent RB1 fantasy compiler. And now he moves into another high powered offense that's going to have a lot of touchdown equity, a lot of pass catching upside as well. But really what it comes down to is I think this is a better fit for him. This wide zone blocking scheme is just tailor made for his skill set. So right now he's getting drafted as an RB2. Wouldn't surprise me one bit if we see him finish as an RB1 again. I think as we get closer to the season and running backs start to move up a little bit, we haven't really seen him rise yet. But I think between now and when the season kicks off, we're going to see him kind of creep into that RB1 territory.
Yeah, last season, if you go and check it out on a points per game basis, in half PPR, Joe Mixon was the RB13. This is a guy who was still putting up numbers. And I know we tend to kind of overinflate this idea that running backs are not as efficient as they have been in the past. And there's a lot of credence to that, right? And we do have to take a moment to talk about that, like when it comes up. But I think we've started to see that oftentimes the yards per carry metric that people love to look at isn't as valuable as maybe we think. And really just one of the biggest things for a running back is usage. And for a team that is this good, it's going to be in scoring position, that goes and trades for a running back like Mixon. And Dave, you had the beautiful point of talking about the scheme that they run, that outside wide zone scheme. It fits Joe Mixon perfectly. Julia, I want to ask you this. Joe Mixon, is he still a top 15 running back for you going into the season?
Yeah, I think the thing with Joe Mixon is he will always be a very unsexy pick, right? You're never going to be like, yeah, I got Joe Mixon. Yeah, that's, going out of your draft like that. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, he's like fallen to me several years in a row, and I had that exact same feeling. But at the end of the year, you're like, oh, yeah, I started him every week. I was not nervous doing it. He has the volume, and it just like you're saying, that's what he's going to have there. And that Houston offense is going to be incredible again. And no matter what, I want pieces of that. And you start to think like where those wide receivers are going. And do you want to pay the money on that? Can you maybe just grab a Joe Mixon and maybe get a good deal on that? And as much as I loved Dameon Pierce coming out of college, I'm willing to admit defeat on that. Like they don't love him. They just don't. No. I feel like they just kept him there just to be like, it's all right, buddy. We'll give you a couple carries. It's all going to go.
I think he gets traded, honestly. I wouldn't surprise me to see Dameon Pierce. Again, it's just not a good fit. Like for Dameon Pierce's play style and what they're running there. But just to go off on a little mini tangent here, and I just did this running backs article last week, but I've just completely changed my philosophy on running backs this offseason. I used to always look for those guys that were like sparked up and athletic and, just waiting for them to have their breakout. And I've just become so agnostic at this point. I find myself leaving so many drafts with like Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, and Ezekiel Elliott. It's like if nobody wants these old running backs that are going to get 15 to 20 touches a game, I'll take him. And Joe Mixon is one of those old running backs who's going to get a lot of volume on a good offense. You don't feel good about it, but you can draft 3 or 4 wide receivers and then still build around Joe Mixon as your RB1.
Yeah, and shoot for the high upside on the wide receivers. Absolutely. And you'll still get a couple weeks randomly where Mixon is like 2 touchdowns, maybe 1 through the air as well. Like he'll give you a couple of those spike weeks too. So
last season, we saw the least amount of running backs getting 20 plus touches per game that we've seen in it's lowest number that we've seen in like 6-7 years. The NFL is trending more and more towards these committee backfields. So when you come across a running back like a Joe Mixon, like a Derrick Henry that you mentioned, Dave, these old running backs that they're still getting volume, you're like, yeah, of course I'll take that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, guys, I want to let you all know there are tons of ways that you can enjoy our show. First of all, we have our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy. I was informed, of course, me, the idiot, the YouTube guy. I can't believe I messed this up. The YouTube guy forgot to put the @footballguysfantasy in the link. So yes, youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy. If you're already watching us here on YouTube, make sure that you like this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Leave a comment about these players we're talking about. Maybe there's someone that we're raising up our draft boards that you're saying, not so fast. Or there's someone that you totally agree upon and you just really want to talk about that one. Maybe someone that we didn't talk about that should be on there. Let us know in the comments below. And then our podcast, our audio version of this show. If this is something you're just like, I'm not going to go to YouTube, but I want to go check you guys out on the podcast, you can check us out over on Apple or Spotify. Listen to this episode while you're doing whatever you like to do while you listen to your fantasy football podcast. And leave a review for us afterwards. 5 stars would be really appreciated. Let us know what you like about the show. Now, Julia, we're getting to you here on your biggest running back riser. And listen, Dave and I have already talked ad nauseum about this player. So I am really excited to hear someone else come in and actually say more good things about Zamir White, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders.
Look, how can you hate Zamir White at this point? Like, coming off of the end of last year, the majority of last year, it was really like a tale of, I'd say 2 halves, but it was more like 2/3 and 1/3. He didn't really do much for 2/3 of the season, but you had Josh Jacobs there. But the end of the season, he was insane. I mean, through week 15, he wasn't doing that great, but in the last 3 weeks, he was killing it. I think he ran the ball like over 80 times in the last 4 games of the season, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I was waiting to see, because I have him in a bunch of places. And I was like, please God, don't draft another running back. Please don't draft anyone in the first couple of rounds. They drafted what's his name? Dylan Laube. Yeah, in the 6th round. Lobby. Yeah, exactly. So they drafted him in the 6th round. I'm not really super concerned. You've got Alexander Mattison there. I think that ship has unfortunately sailed. We were all really hoping that to be on that boat. And then there's somebody else there too. Amir Abdullah. I mean, what is this? 2005? It's not happening. So I think like Zamir White, he's gonna be the guy. And we were just talking about finding a running back that has the potential to be a bell cow and out there, as much as they can be. And Zamir White could be that guy. Like, you have that team. Look, their identity is run the ball. They've said it over and over and over again. And that's kind of why I'm worried about Devontae Adams as well. And also, what are you looking at quarterback wise? I'm as much behind Gardner Minshew as the next person, but he's not gonna be a top 5 quarterback. So Zamir White is going to run the ball. There's so many targets that were vacated from Josh Jacobs. He had 233 attempts last year. He had 52 targets. I mean, sign me up. Zamir White, 100%. I think he's going to have a monster year.
I talked about him last year on our show, or last week on our show, and a lot last year while we're on it. But I mean, he had 115 yards per game as a starter, which is just unbelievable. And the pass catching might leave a little bit to be desired, but again, all that is baked into his price. You can get him right now in the 8th round of drafts, which is absolutely crazy.
This is a bell cow running back in the 8th round of the draft. That's that's unheard of.
Yep. I mean, I've done about 30 drafts now, 30 best ball drafts, and Zamir White is my 2nd most rostered running back. I just can't stop myself when I see him sitting there in round 8, regardless of whether I've already got a running back or 2 or whether I've got 5 wide receivers. He will fit into any construction at that price.
I agree. And I know like some people are wondering like, well, how much have we really seen from him? Is he really good? I think, number one, I think he's really good. And number 2, does it really matter if he's getting all that volume? Like, he doesn't need to be perfect. If you're going with volume in the 8th round, you have nowhere to go but up. So he's a great pick.
For the people that are worried that Zamir White is Alexander Mattison, one, we had never seen Alexander Mattison really do what Zamir White was able to do last year. 2, we've got a team here in the Las Vegas Raiders that have fully committed to the run. That was never something that the Minnesota Vikings were doing.
Correct.
This is a defensive-minded head coach. This is a run-first offense. This is a team that really doesn't have an established quarterback. All the things that you guys said. So before we try to say, hey, Zamir White might not be as talented as people think, and the volume. And we ran into this, we all stepped on that rake last year, Alexander Madison. This is not really the same scenario.
I agree.
Dave, I want to ask you, and Julia, you as well. Dave, I'll throw it to you first. Is there an easier draft selection to make when Zamir White's name pops up at his ADP right now?
No, like I said, I mean, he's my second most. The only guy I've drafted more than Zamir White so far is Tony Pollard, and we'll talk about him a lot this offseason as well. He just kind of is another guy that works into a lot of roster constructions. But when you're looking at ADP right now, I'm pulling it up where Zamir White is going. The guys in the same range as him. DeAndre Swift, who is going to be in a three-headed committee on a Bears team that's going to be passing the ball a lot. Najee Harris, who I think is another kind of good pick, but we saw him, he's going to be splitting touches with Jalen Warren. Ramondre Stevenson coming off a down year. They've got Antonio Gibson in the fold now. David Montgomery, who's going to be losing a lot of touches to Jahmyr Gibbs. So you look at all the running backs in that range, they're all splitting. They're all in a committee. And then Zamir White has almost no competition for touches. Like I said, the lack of pass catching is going to leave a little bit to be desired with the ceiling, but the floor is so safe. You can basically just ink this guy down for 250 carries this year.
I agree.
Julia, do you get worried about? I know we are all in on Zamir White, right? Like, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate for the sake of conversation here. Is that oftentimes it gets talked about at these running backs is even though there's volume, what if the offense is really bad? How much does that worry you with Zamir White?
I mean, along the lines of like playing from behind or that they'll need to pass and stuff. I mean, I think if you look at it in that way, if you run the numbers, I think that it really doesn't impact people as much as you think when it's like, oh, these guys are going to be playing from behind. That quarterback's going to throw more. That, I think when you run the numbers, that's not as big a deal. And I think this offense will be fine. It's not going to be incredible, but I think it'll be fine. It'll be good enough for him. And especially if he's the only one, then I think he's going to be fine. And at that price, if you were getting him, if this was like a third, fourth round situation, then no. But I mean, you're getting him in the 8th round, you said, Dave. Like, come
on. And the other thing I'll say, he started 4 games last year. One of those games was a loss. It was kind of weird. Like when Antonio Pierce took over as the head coach, they went on this little hot streak. But in the one game that they lost, that was a close game to the Colts in week 17, Zamir White pulled 6 targets. So it's not like when they started losing, they just completely pulled him off the field. And of course, they've got Laube now, who's a very good pass catcher, and he might see a little bit of work as well. But they showed that they're willing to trust Zamir White in a pass catching role the same way that they did with Josh Jacobs. So we're looking at the kind of floor outcome here saying, well, he doesn't catch passes, but what if he does? What if he is a 3-down back and he's getting these 3rd down and distance snaps as well? Then all of a sudden we're looking at an untapped ceiling here.
You're getting me all hot and bothered. Seriously. Like, I mean, remember how good Josh Jacobs was 2 years ago at that low price that we were paying? Like, if we see that again, hello.
There's a world, Dave. There's a world. There's a world where it happens. All right. I'm going to give you guys my first rankings riser. And it's interesting because the more and more I look at it, like, he shouldn't really be a rankings riser. I just don't know what happened with all of us where we decided to put him a little bit lower, and myself included. I want to talk about Amari Cooper, the wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. We go back and we look, and he's been a top 20 fantasy wide receiver or better in 5 of his last 6 seasons. He's been through 3 different teams. He's been productive everywhere he's been. Last year was the wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game. The Browns were a mess. The Browns were a mess throughout passing, throughout that offense, throughout everything. 5 different quarterbacks in the season, 6 games started by the trio of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, PJ Walker, and oh my gosh, guys, I totally forgot that Jeff Driscoll was out there as well. Like this, it got bad. The Browns were down bad. And now we'll see if this is going to be better for them. But Ken Dorsey steps in as the offensive coordinator for the Browns. I expect a little less of a run-heavy approach, more vertical concepts. That's typically what he's like to do. Amari Cooper, that fits him perfectly. He had the second most catches of 40-plus yards in the NFL last year with 8 of them. Kevin Stefanski's already talked about how they want to shift this offense to make Deshaun Watson more comfortable, a little bit more of what he did in Houston with DeAndre Hopkins, just saying. And then the Browns, I get it. They added Jerry Jeudy. He's good enough to draw attention from the defense, but not be the leading target earner on this team. Like, he couldn't beat Courtland Sutton as the leading target earner in Denver. He's not doing that with Amari Cooper. And then the last thing here for me is with Amari Cooper, when he's actually had quality quarterback play last season, those 9 games that he had with Deshaun Watson and Joe Flacco, he was averaging 17 fantasy points per game. That would have made him the wide receiver 4 on the season. And then even if you go and you remove his massive 46-point output that he had in week 16, where he got a lot of people to the fantasy championships, you remove that entirely, he's still wide receiver 15 in points per game. So this is a guy that I don't get his current ADP at wide receiver 29, which is just what? I mean, sorry, Joe, what the hell are we doing? Wide receiver 29? What? I don't get it. I don't understand the concerns. Maybe one of you guys has something for me. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 21, which is, it could still be low. Like, there's some sort of apprehension there, but I think Amari Cooper is a locked and loaded, rock solid wide receiver 2. And I don't understand what we're doing here with his current ADP at wide receiver 29. Julia, help me solve this riddle.
I mean, it goes back to the same thing that I said about, the unsexy pick. Like I feel like you look at Amari Cooper and you're like, oh, fine. Okay. Amari Cooper, he'll be fine. But like you said, I mean, look, that's another team that their identity was running the ball for a long time. And then you lose Nick Chubb. And then it's like, okay, well, how good is Nick Chubb is he going to be okay coming back? So I think we need to be like, okay, they're not necessarily going to be the run heavy team that we're used to. And yeah, I agree with you with Jerry Jeudy. Couldn't beat Cortland Sutton. He's going to take some attention. And then you have Elijah Moore and a couple other. You got David Bell running cardio out there. Like it's going to be Amari Cooper. It's 100% going to be Amari Cooper. And he's shown, like you said, doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball. He's there. He's going to give you a really good floor. And we've seen those spike weeks that he gave last season that everyone was really happy when they put him in their lineup. I was very happy when he was in my lineup. So yeah, if you can get him at that ADP, I think that's another steal.
I think people are just bored. Like this guy, he's heading into what, year 8 or 9 now in the league. And I think there's still a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths with how he left Dallas because he had a really down year where he got usurped by CeeDee Lamb and he wasn't.
Oh, good word, Dave. Anymore. Usurped.
Nice. It's your word of the day. That's a good one.
I've been watching some Game of Thrones. I think that's where that one came from. But CeeDee Lamb just took the wide receiver 1 role from Amari Cooper, and then Amari Cooper went to this run first offense in Cleveland. But he's had 1,100 and 1,200 yards in back-to-back seasons. Like he's been wildly productive in Cleveland, and I think people just haven't really caught on to it. Like you said, even last year with the carousel of quarterbacks that they had there, he still had over 1,200 yards. So Amari Cooper for me, another really easy pick. As much as I love to disagree with you and tell you when you're wrong, Alfredo, I like Amari Cooper this year.
Yeah. I love it. You know what I'm going to do is I'm only just going to keep picking players that I know you already like, and it's just going to piss you off that much more. You have to agree with me.
Do you guys fight a lot? Is this a real mom and dad fighting situation here?
All the time. We make it so awkward for guests, just when we go back and forth. No, I mean, there's some disagreements, but I think it's, when you disagree, then you kind of give both sides of the story to the audience, let the audience decide. But once redraft season turns around, that's when Alfredo and I start to agree a lot. We Dynasty, we butt heads from time to time, but I think when it's looking at a single season, we tend to align on a lot of takes.
Yeah.
Mostly because Dave is wrong in Dynasty, but that's okay. Dave, let's move along here. Let's get to your second riser, another wide receiver who's had his share of ups and downs, been on different teams, but now Marquise Hollywood Brown ends up on the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could not pick a better landing spot for him. There's everything that's going on with Rashee Rice. Talk to us about why Marquise Brown is a pretty obvious rankings riser at this moment.
Well, you'd think so, and I've got him as a riser on this show, but his ADP is literally falling on Underdog. Every single day, he is just falling another spot, and I think this is just kind of that shiny new toy syndrome. People are really excited about Xavier Worthy, and rightfully so. I think that he can be a good player, but I'm going to tell a little bit of a story because that's what I like to do.
I like
here.
stories.
And I just wrote 2,000 words on Marquise Brown and
I'm out.
I think he can really break into this offense. You look throughout his career. When he was in Baltimore, he was displaying elite peripherals, but it was a very small passing pie there. Lamar Jackson was barely throwing for 2,000 yards a season. So we saw the target share, we saw the efficiency, we saw all these things, but it never materialized on the run-first Greg Roman offense. Then all of a sudden he goes to Arizona, gets teamed up with his quarterback there from college, and over the first 6 weeks of that season with DeAndre Hopkins suspended, we saw the ceiling for Marquise Brown. He was still pulling targets, he was still being an efficiency king, and he was doing this on a much much larger passing by, and he was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy scoring for that 6-week stretch. And then last year he was hurt, so it's kind of tough to draw much from that. By the time Kyler Murray returned, he was injured, and then it ended up inevitably ending his season. Now, the story I want to tell is about Tyreek Hill leaving the Kansas City Chiefs. Since Tyreek Hill has left the Chiefs, we have seen this delineation in their wide receiver room where everybody is either running a route deep downfield or short downfield, and the numbers match that. Every single wide receiver last year either had an average depth of target less than 10 yards or more than 17 yards. So
Wow.
Justin Watson and MVS were 4th and 5th in the league in target depth last year. Rashee Rice and Kadarius Toney were the 2 last place finishers in target depth. So they've been looking for somebody that can come in and do what Tyreek Hill used to do: when inside, when outside, when deep, when short, catch deep balls, take yards, short catches, and do things after the catch. And that's exactly what Marquise Brown has done throughout his career. If you look, his usage and efficiency is almost identical to what Tyreek Hill had there. So I'm envisioning a world where they finally have this kind of queen piece on a chessboard that Andy Reid has been looking for. He tried it with Kadarius Toney, tried it with Sky Moore, tried it with all these guys, and it hasn't really worked out. But I think Marquise Brown can play that role where we saw Tyreek Hill all over the field a few years back in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Julia, is Marquise Brown the guy that you want out of Kansas City, or are you just kind of seeing which of these 3 wide receivers ends up falling lowest in your draft?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I like Hollywood, but you actually just really sold me on it, Dave, with some of those ADOT data. I think that if Rashee Rice wouldn't have made some bad decisions, we would be having a different conversation. And because it was clear that Mahomes and him had made that connection by the end of the year, right? And we see how they were using Kelsey last year, and they've kind of came out and said it that they're going to do that again, right? He's getting older. They're going to try to not force him as much during the year, use him more down the stretch. And so, like you said, Dave, they're going to want someone who is out there and running that part of the field. I think Brown is probably who you do want to get. And if he is falling to the right spot, I think Mahomes is going to have an insane year. And I've never been somebody who drafts a quarterback early, but if I get lucky enough, I got him in one league and I was like, this should be very exciting. I'm looking forward to the year with that. And I think Brown's going to have a very surprisingly good year. So yeah, I think he's a good pick.
And I think Rashee Rice, regardless of whether he plays, I don't think he's going to impact Brown all that much. I think if anything, you can actually argue that Rice being on the field is good for Brown
Yeah.
because Rice is really kind of a one-trick pony. He's so
Yeah.
limited in his skill set. He's catching balls 3 to 4 yards off the line of scrimmage, and that's pretty much it. He
Yeah.
cannot win downfield. He cannot run deep routes. So I think if you've got Rice there kind of pulling the defenses a little bit closer, then you've got Marquise Brown, who can kind of take the top off defenses, but can also, just keeping defenders on their toes, never really knowing what route he is going to run. I mean, really, it's just like I said, Marquise Brown is a very good player. We knew that when he was
Yeah.
in Baltimore. We saw it in little taste in Arizona. Now all of a sudden, a really good player is dropped into a really good offense with a really good quarterback. It's so easy to see the ceiling outcome here where Marquise Brown can finish as a top 10 guy.
Yeah, I think people are forgetting how good he is because of last year, because of him being injured and Kyler being injured and all that stuff. You sort of went, whatever, he's fine. But yeah, and that's when you can get a good player because people are remembering the most recent sort of bad experience they had with them. That's when you can get him at a deal.
Recency bias. Yep.
That's the word.
Sky Moore Hive, throw your hands up. This is our time.
Is it? I want it to be.
There are dozens of us.
We should, right. I didn't see you at the meeting last week. Tuesday night meeting? Yeah. We should really get together more often.
So sad. So sad.
All
right, Julia, let's get to your next riser here. Another guy that we have talked a bunch about. So as Dave loves to say, we are in lockstep with you.
Love it.
Because you want to talk about Arizona Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray, who I recently actually did just move up once again. Moved him up my rankings. I've now got him ahead of CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow, and I'm more willing to take the, let's say, calculated risk on these quarterbacks that present you with a high rushing ceiling and a high rushing floor. So talk to us about Kyler Murray and why he's rising up your ranks.
Well, I can't say an ill word about my sweet baby Kyler. I am a Cardinals fan. I'm born and raised in Arizona, so it takes me a lot to hate these guys. No, it's what you're saying, right? It's that upside that you get with the rushing ability. And look, last year was tough. He only played 8 games, but he did average over 18 fantasy points a game when he was playing, and you always have that rushing baseline. In 2022, he had over 500 yards rushing. The year before, it was over 800, and the 2 years before, it was over 400 each of those years. And I know there was like some talk about whether he was actually really going to stay to be the franchise quarterback in Arizona. I don't know if that was more just chatter around like local Arizona sports personalities, but the team has made it clear that they are married to Kyler. Like they're all in. They got him the best wide receiver in the draft and in a long time. They got my running back one in Trey Benson, which I think is a wonderful add. You throw Zay Jones in there, another guy who is just consistently there. He'll be a great target for him. And you have Kyler off another year recovering from that ACL. There's all the data that shows that second year for players off an ACL injury is so much better than the year before. And you still got Michael Wilson. You've got the Dortch. He's got
Dortch.
The Dortch. You got Dorched. I'm team McBee. Like Trey McBride is one of my top tight ends. I think he's going to have an incredible year. Look, we're all set up for success in Arizona. Whether or not it happens is another thing. But Kyler is now above Joe Burrow for me as well, and CJ Stroud. Great players, absolutely, but these are pocket passers that you need to have a 35-40 touchdown season to pay off for where you are taking them. And, everyone's going after Richardson, everyone's going after Lamar, which they should, but if you wait a little bit longer, you can get Kyler, who might give you exactly very close to those numbers, maybe even more. And you're not having to use the 4th quarterback off the board for him. So, yeah, big fan of him.
That's exactly where Kyler is for me. He's my QB6 in rankings.
Yes.
I want him ahead of Burrow.
But he's going as like quarterback 10 or 11. Like you can wait and take him. All the, high-end quarterbacks are going to be gone and you can take him later. Like,
I think this is another recency bias thing. He came back a little bit later than expected, but literally his first week back last year, you never would have thought that he was coming off of an ACL tear. He had all his mobility there. Now he's another year removed. He'll just be even more confident on that knee. He has much better pass catchers around him. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have to sell us at all. This is a very pro Kyler show. We were talking about it before the draft. We were talking about it in Dynasty. JJ Zacharyson talked about him as being his favorite sleeper quarterback last week. So, lockstep.
I almost wore my Kyler shirt too. So I was like, I just need to make sure that they know I'm pro Kyler.
The thing with Kyler, and I think what happens with so many of these players, is that perception just becomes reality, right? Like the analysis of it, the deep dive into the analytics just gets kind of thrown out, especially when you've taken a guy like Kyler and we've memeified him. Like we've made him a meme. Like it's, oh, he's so little. Ha ha ha. Here's a picture of Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. And it's just like the top of Kyler's hair. And like, I get it. He's short or he plays video games. Like cool. But like, he's also very good at football. He also scores you plenty of fantasy points. He's also in a much better situation. And like, these are the things that we just have to recognize. Like we can't let the narrative start to spin out of control. And then that's how you end up forgetting about players. And that's how a guy like Kyler ends up being such a great value. And it's honestly, it's kind of shocking and weird that last week JJ Zacharyson would be able to call Kyler Murray a sleeper quarterback.
Yeah.
It's just 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing.
No, not at all. And I think I didn't know what to expect from Jonathan Gannon. And I was like, I don't know if these players are going to like want to play for him. But last year, that Cardinals team played their heart out. They played their heart out when you knew they weren't going to win. They gave so many good teams a run for their money. And it's like, if you take that passion going into this year with the talent that they've added, I think the Cardinals are going to be one of the teams that turns around drastically. And I want parts of that offense. So.
Yeah, that's going to be the theme here in the offseason is find good offenses and get parts of those offenses. Now, we'll see if this works for my next riser. I hope that this offense can get better. This is more so, to me, it falls into that same bucket that it did with Amari Cooper, where we have a guy who is not being valued properly, and we kind of get bored and we forget how good these players are. And that's why I think Christian Kirk needs to be rising up the fantasy football ranks. Let's go back to 2022. Kirk was the wide receiver 11 in overall fantasy points. getting 7.5 targets per game, a 21% target share. He scored 8 of Trevor Lawrence's 12 touchdowns as a rookie. Like, that was his guy and has pretty much been his guy. That stuff has not changed. He got another 21% target share the following season. He's been at 7 targets per game. This is a guy who's always done it, whether it's been with Zay Jones and Marvin Jones or Calvin Ridley jumps in. But last year when Calvin Ridley did jump in, he was the guy that ended up with the touchdowns, ended up with 8 touchdowns. Now the Jaguars don't have Calvin Ridley. They don't have Zay Jones. Those guys are out. They replaced them with Brian Thomas Jr., a rookie, and Gabe Davis, cardio club president. Okay.
Yes.
Christian Kirk remains in the slot where Trevor Lawrence loves to target. And that's what we even saw. Like last year, we had weeks where we were getting excited about Parker Washington, like the 5th or 6th wide receiver on the Jaguars, because he was in the Christian Kirk role. Well, guess who's going to be in the Christian Kirk role again? Christian Kirk. Like it's wild. It's crazy. I understand this. So when you start to look at the relationship with Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence, that 7.5 targets to me, like, just stands out, that it's been consistent. It hasn't mattered what is going out there on the field or what kind of personnel is going out there. And when I started to look at this, like, how much do the targets really matter? Well, last season, 73, almost 3/4 of wide receivers who averaged 7.5 targets per game finished as top 24 wide receivers. If you're telling me that I can draft a guy where he's going at wide receiver 31 in drafts, and there's a 75% chance that I get not just a good return on investment, but a potentially great return on investment, a guy who has been a wide receiver 11 in fantasy, yeah, I'm going to take that. And I do think that his ranking should reflect that. This is the type of thing that we should be taking into consideration when we're ranking a guy like Christian Kirk. Okay, I'm going to catch my breath. I'm going to calm down a little bit because Dave, I don't get it. I don't get why he's at wide receiver 31. I've got him a little bit higher. I've got him as my wide receiver 26 right now. I think he's the perfect high upside wide receiver 3 that you can target, whether it's in best ball, whether it's in redraft. He can even be a good wide receiver 2 for you if you decide that you want to start running back heavy. So, Dave, I don't remember. I think you might be a little bit lower on Christian Kirk. Is this a Trevor Lawrence thing, or is it a Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis thing?
I've got a Christian Kirk T-shirt in my closet. All right, that's how much I like Christian Kirk.
I know you do. I know you love him.
I'm a big fan of Christian Kirk, but what we've seen has been, consistent. Like 2 years ago, you mentioned when he was the wide receiver 11 in total points, but that season he was averaging 14.2 PPR points per game, which is fair. Like that's good, wide receiver 2 production, and that's kind of what we saw last year too. I'm just not sure there's a huge ceiling outcome here. I think he's a very safe player, like you said. He's going to pull 7 targets per game, 8 targets per game, and I think when you're looking for a wide receiver 3, that's somebody that you can confidently plug in. I think come redraft season, which is obviously what we're talking here, I'm a-okay taking Christian Kirk. It's just like in these best ball drafts where you're swinging for upside. I'm not sure how much upside there is there. You can get Brian Thomas later. I think he has more upside. Evan Ingram is going to give you similar production to Christian Kirk, and you can get it at the tight end position. I just think with Christian Kirk, we've seen enough now that like the best case scenario for him is 14, 15 points per game, where, if everything goes right for Brian Thomas, he can be an 18, 19 point per game type of guy. So it's not that I dislike Christian Kirk. I like the player. I like where he's at. I just worry a little bit about his high end range of outcomes.
So, Christian Kirk he had 8 touchdowns. Like, this is still a guy that there is high end upside there. Maybe I'm a little bit too low on Brian Thomas because I do think there are a lot of things that he needs to clean up coming out of college. And I don't like the
lower floor too. Brian Thomas could end up being Quentin Johnson this year, and he could be the wide receiver 105 at the end of the year. But he also has it where maybe, he doesn't need to be great. Maybe he could just run 9 routes and build a connection with Trevor Lawrence and have a big season. Where I think Christian Kirk, it's just the ceiling is a little bit lower. The floor is much, much, much higher. I don't dislike Kirk. I'm not trying to sit here saying that you shouldn't draft Christian Kirk. I agree with everything that you're saying. I think he's a fine wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. I just worry a little bit about the ceiling.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Dave. And I think great floor for Christian Kirk, 100%. Beautiful floor. I think so much of this is, what do you think is going to happen with Trevor Lawrence, right? I feel like there were so many near misses last season. There were so many, like, all those Calvin Ridley drop touchdowns, those little things that he missed. Like, if all of those would have gone in, he would have had such a better finish, and we might be having a different conversation. I still don't know if I believe in Trevor Lawrence. I don't know. I did a couple of years ago, and then he's just broken my heart. And so I don't know if he's ever going to be that 4,040 touchdown guy. Like he's just not. I don't know. But same thing. I don't hate Christian Kirk either. I think he's a solid floor, but I agree with you. Some of the other guys that are going in that area, if you're deciding between him and someone with bigger upside, I think there are probably players in that area that have higher upside. But it depends what you're needing and if you're in best ball or redraft, right?
I think the nice thing about Christian Kirk is the consistency. Like you're getting 10 points a week every single week, and that's great
Very
for
consistent.
redraft.
Yes.
It's
That's
not
what I
something-
was getting at. That's what I was getting at. It's a bit more of, okay, I can get my high upside guys. Like obviously you're going to get that early in drafts because that's why they're going early. You could also take some risks, calculated risks on guys later.
Yes.
Christian Kirk kind of just falls into that perfect bucket where you're saying, okay, I started early with running backs. Let me just get a guy that I can plug into the wide receiver 2 spot every single week. And I'm looking at him now, guys, and I just want to play a quick little name game with you guys. Okay. So Christian Kirk or Terry McLaurin?
Christian Kirk.
Terry.
I don't think.
Oh,
I don't
Dave,
think
you're
Terry
gross.
there. Yeah.
Dave,
I
you're
think
gross.
that's he's so old. Guess how old Terry McLaurin is?
29.
Oh,
20.
you know that. You just looked that up.
No, I know everyone's age. I'm just
I feel like
it's
he's so
skill
much
trap here.
older than we think he
Okay.
is.
He was drafted young, yeah.
Christian Kirk or Calvin Ridley?
I'm going Kirk there.
Kirk, yeah.
Okay. Christian Kirk or Chris Godwin?
Godwin.
Godwin.
Oh, so we're taking the wide receiver 2 for Baker over the wide receiver 1 for Trevor.
I don't know.
That's where we're at?
That's a questionable one.
I think that's yeah, he's the wide receiver 2, but I think that you're looking at very different usage for these guys. I mean, Christian Kirk, he's wasn't even top 32 in target share last year. So like, yeah, he was the wide receiver 1 for his team, but the peripheral metrics we see for him, his target share, his targets per route run, his yards per route run, his average target depth, all of these things would have made him a wide receiver 2 on most teams.
Everything's changed. Everything's changed. Calvin Ridley's gone. The bad man can't hurt you anymore, Dave. All right, we'll move on. I couldn't convince you guys. Whatever. Dave, let's go to your next riser. I'm sure that I'll respond accordingly. Talk to me about rookie tight end Ben Sinnott.
Well, this guy actually is rising. You know, he was going like round 18 in drafts before the draft and then surprised a lot of people with that round 2 draft capital. Ended up going 53rd overall, tight end 2 of this class, very clearly behind only Brock Bowers. And now he's getting drafted all of a sudden as tight end 17. His ADP is like the 12th or the 13th round, but I regularly see him going before that. This kid was a walk-on at Kansas State and then just in a matter of years turned himself into a round 2 NFL draft pick. I like when rookies get drafted to teams that have a rookie quarterback, they can kind of get that head start in rookie OTAs. So hopefully Sinnott and Jaden Daniels have a chance to kind of foster that chemistry early in the offseason here. But really, this guy, he is just hyper athletic, 9.76 relative athletic score on a 10-point scale. He lacked a little bit in the 40 time, but when you watch him play, he's one of those like quick, not fast guys. For a guy his size, 6'4", 250, he's got really, really quick feet, really light on his toes. He can make plays after the catch. He's a very sure-handed receiver. You know, a lot of people comp him to Sam Laporta, and I think that sets expectations a little bit too high after what Sam Laporta did last year. But, you know, he's got all of the things that you want to see from a tight end. He's a good route runner, makes plays after the catch, draws targets, catches touchdowns. It's really easy to envision a world where Sinnott can kind of follow the footsteps of a lot of tight ends that we've seen in recent years and be a fantasy contributor in his rookie season.
So does the Zach Ertz thing not worry you at all?
No.
That they have a veteran tight end there who can play? Like, is this just we just think that Zach Ertz is nothing?
Can he still play? Can he?
He was okay last year. I mean, he had to get injured before Trey McBride really broke out. And I think that is concerning that he was able to inhibit Trey McBride a little bit last year. But no, I think Sinnott is the tight end 1 ahead of Trey McBride. Or I'm sorry, ahead of Zach Ertz.
Yeah, I was like, relax about the Trey McBride. But okay, so then here comes my question, guys, and Dave, I'll throw it to you first since this is your guy. Like, are we expecting Jaden Daniels to hold it down for Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Ben Sinnott? Like, do we think that Ben Sinnott?
McCaffrey.
Yeah, and Luke McCaffrey, and then they've got Austin Eckler, and then there's I mean, there's a lot going on in this offense, and it is Cliff Kingsbury, the same guy who like made Trey McBride kind of sit behind Zach Ertz. Like that's there's enough things there that worry me. Not saying that Ben Sinnott's not talented, not saying that he won't be good for, let's say, best ball or dynasty, but in redraft, I find it very hard to be like, I want him on my team because I don't know that he gets near that top 12 or top 15 for me.
Yeah, I
Dave?
think he's going to be number 2 on the team in targets behind Terry McLaurin.
Whoa. Okay. So you think he's overtaking Jahan Dotson?
I do, yeah, and Jahan Dotson, he could, but we haven't seen it so far at this point in his career. If it wasn't for first round draft capital on Jahan Dotson, I don't think we'd really been talking about him or be talking about him all that much. We're just kind of holding on to our priors from draft season a few years back. He hasn't really done much. I mean, this is a guy going into last offseason that you and I both really liked, Alfredo. We were talking about him a lot in season as well, and it seemed like every time we'd recommend him, he would fall flat. I think at this point we've seen enough from Jahan Dotson. We also see rookies tend to lean on their tight ends. Tight ends have a bigger catch radius. They run shorter routes. So while I think McLaurin's probably the clear-cut one here, wouldn't surprise me if Sinnott ends up being number 2.
Wow. I'm not there. I'm not there, but Julia, you seem to be very much in agreement with Dave on that.
I am all in on Mr. Sinnott. Yeah, I think it's funny because you said the negative idea of having Kingsbury there with Ertz, and I look at that completely differently. Like that's exactly the situation Trey McBride was in. He was in there, he was behind Ertz, and you had Cliff Kingsbury, and I think that I was teasing a little bit. Yeah, Ertz can still play, but I mean, he's like 33 or 34. Like he is getting up there and he is injury prone. And like you said, Dave, Sinnott he's big, he's athletic, the connection with a rookie quarterback as well. And I too was a believer in Dotson, and unfortunately that ship has sailed too. And so I think I agree with you. I think he will be number 2 in targets behind McLaurin. And I think God, I'd love him to be Sam Laporta number 2, but I mean, that is pretty high to think, but I think he's going to have a very solid year, and he's somebody I'm going after, but he's starting to move up and people are starting to snag him.
I think we've got a bad case of rookie fever. I am not out on Jahan Dotson yet. This is not a talentless player. This is a guy who has dealt with horrible quarterback play.
Yeah.
The Ben Sinnott thing.
I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Dotson surprises us and we're very happy.
I think we can all respectfully disagree, but let's do this. Let's add some context to it. Let's put some names versus one another. Okay, so to put this with other tight ends in the same range, Ben Sinnott or Dalton Schultz?
Sinnott for me.
Sinnott over Dalton Schultz, really?
Mm-hmm. Dalton Schultz was very ineffective last year. Yeah, in the games where Tank Dell and Nico Collins were both healthy, Dalton Schultz was an afterthought. Now you throw Diggs in the mix as well. He needs 2 injuries to really be relevant.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, Dalton Schultz is one of my biggest faves.
I'm getting acid reflux. Ben Sinnott or Pat Freiermuth?
I'll go Freiermuth there.
I'll go Sinnott. And that's closer. That's closer. I have a personal issue drafting Steelers. It's hurting me. It's hurt me too many times.
Sinnott or Kmet?
Well, Kmet's a faller for me, and Sinnott's a riser, so that's a pretty easy one. We'll talk about Kmet later in the show, but yeah, I'm taking Sinnott over Kmet.
Juwan Johnson?
Sinnott. And again,
It's
we talk about it all the time. Like the way for a fantasy relevant tight end to hit is to be first or second on their team in targets. Schultz isn't going to be first or second on his team in targets. Kmet is not going to be first or second on his team in targets.
I don't think Sinnott's going to be top 3 in his team in targets, though.
You don't think he's going to be top 3?
No, I don't think he gets. I mean, he's not going to be ahead of Terry McLaurin. I don't think he gets ahead of Jahan Dotson. And I'm spoiling this, but even for one of my guys that's a faller, like I don't think he's necessarily going to be ahead of Austin Eckler. There's a lot of worry, and I mean, we talk about loaded offenses. Luke McCaffrey's in there too. They draft a slot receiver. By the talk that we just had and the preferential, treatment here, not pre-treatment, but the preferences of Ben Sinnott over some of these guys, it sounds like you guys have him around like tight end 14. Like he is draftable in redraft for you guys.
Yeah,
is that where we are?
Yeah, because if if you're attacking tight end as like the greater late situation, right? You're getting one of the top 2 or 3. Otherwise, you're waiting. I mean the the high end outcome that could come of Ben Sinnott is very, very high, right? I know, like you said, the the low could be 4th in his team in targets, but what if he is 2nd or even 1st
There's a
because
world.
of there is totally a world. And if I'm waiting until the very end to draft a tight end, like, I'm going to take him over, the 2nd tight end on a team, one of my
All right.
fallers,
All right. All
Yeah.
right. All
There
right.
you go.
All right. I'll
There you
stop
go.
pushing. I'll stop pushing.
There you go.
Julia, let's get to your final riser here. Quarterback that we have talked about a little bit. And I mean, it's insert short joke, whatever you want to do, but everything looks so much better around Bryce Young going into this season here with the Carolina Panthers, Dave Canales, the upgraded offensive line, the added weapons. Talk to us about why Bryce Young is a riser for you.
I mean, it's all the things you just said. Young could not have had a worse rookie season. Carolina had the fewest points and the fewest yards of any offense, and it was very clear anytime you happen to have a Carolina game on. I mean, Young had almost 3,000 passing yards, but he had 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, which was it was hard to watch. It was so hard to watch. He had like the 3rd lowest PFF passer rating, which was behind Bailey Zappi and Daniel Jones, which were also difficult to watch. And look, I don't think the improvement that we're going to see in Bryce Young is going to be Josh Allen, but I feel like there's nowhere to go with that, really. I mean, like you said, hiring Dave Canales, like that guy is allegedly the quarterback whisperer, right? Like that's what he's done before. Obviously, some things can go wrong, but we saw it with Geno Smith, we saw it with Russell Wilson, we saw it with Baker, and he's coming in, and hopefully he is going to give Bryce Young the guidance and the tools that will help him play his game. I think that's important too, is like playing to that man's strengths. And then we go out and we get him Xavier Legette, get him Jonathan Brooks. I know Jonathan Brooks might not be ready to play immediately, but if we're building a future for this young man, he's someone who's going to be there. Jatavian Sanders as well. Got Deontay Johnson. You got my guy still in Adam Thielen, old man Adam Thielen, which I'm a big fan of. And look, I own Young in a dynasty league, and it has not been a fun ride. So at the end of last year, I was like, I gotta move him. I gotta get out of this. This is just gross to look at him on my roster. But as the time progressed and the draft started happening, I was like, you know what? I feel like I need to keep him. Because I feel like we could see a bounce back. And yeah, I think he's got nowhere to go but up. I think we'll learn a lot about Bryce Young this season. And
Short joke.
Heyo.
So I was at a draft last night where I drafted Bryce Young in the final round of the draft, round 18. Let me just read some of the names that went before Bryce Young in this draft, just to show how low people are on him right now. Somebody drafted Greg Dulcich before Bryce Young.
With the hair.
Greg
Gross.
Dulcich, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson. We don't even know who the starter is going to be in Pittsburgh, and people are drafting both of them before they're drafting Bryce Young. I mean, I could go on and on. Jalen Tolbert was drafted before him. Audric Estime, Demarcus Robinson. It is crazy how much the market has soured on Bryce Young, and he had a historically bad rookie season, but I am willing to go back to the well again. I mean, he lost his head coach in the middle of his rookie year and had to learn a new offense. Now he's got to learn another new offense, but with Deontay Johnson there, I think he finally kind of has that wide receiver one he's been looking for. I think late in the year when Jonathan Brooks can come in and actually instill a rushing attack that they didn't have last year, that'll help even more. And then, of course, Dave Canales, like you alluded to. So, yeah, I'm very much so in on Bryce Young at his cost this year. It's just a no-risk selection in your drafts.
I agree. And I mean, look, I made the Josh Allen joke, but like Allen's first season he had numbers very comparable to Bryce Young's numbers. And the second season, he was quarterback 6. And I'm not saying Bryce Young is going to be quarterback 6, but
You said it.
no, yeah, there you go. Clip
It's
it, done. That's it. But yeah, I mean, if you're getting him in the last round of your draft and he's, on your bench hanging out and you can plug him in halfway through the season or use him to trade, or that's all you want. You want to hit on a quarterback late like that.
If you are going to draft a second quarterback in redraft leagues, at least let it be someone who has a ceiling, right? Like we're not, guys, I don't know. My second quarterback, I'm probably not drafting Derek Carr. Like that's a wasted roster spot. You're drafting a guy.
Most vanilla person.
Yeah. you're drafting a guy that you're saying, okay, like there can actually be weeks in good matchups where he can be a top 12 quarterback. That's the only reason that you're really doing that.
Yeah.
All right. Let me get to the final rankings riser that we have here. And this one is a bit of projection for me. Okay. I want to talk about Jameson Williams, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. And so much of it has to do with opportunity that is going to be in front of Jameson Williams. And we talked about this. We want to get pieces in good offenses. And I mean, the Lions proved last year they are a very good offense. Now, Dan Campbell's already talked about how he wants and they want, and the whole staff wants Jameson Williams to be a full-time starter. Coaches don't really talk like that about busts. They typically say, oh, he's got some work to do. He'll have to earn it. He'll have to fight. Like, and that's how you get Treylon Burks. And they just go and they bring in 3 other receivers. This is a guy who it still seems like he is in the good graces of the team. We saw all the fun stuff where he's out there blocking, he's out there busting his butt, and he was making some big plays. And this actually surprised me when I looked it up, was that Jameson Williams was the wide receiver 36 or better in 3 of his final 7 games last year. I'm not telling you anything that's going to blow you away or make you say, I got to get him, whatever his ADP is. But there's a pathway here where Jameson Williams is actually a productive wide receiver with high upside. And if we go back to the upside thing, whether it's for best ball, redraft, whatever, and there's a guy you could plug in as a wide receiver 3 or as one of your flexes, something like that. I mean, especially if there's bonuses and stuff for deep balls and for touchdowns and whatever it may be, Jameson Williams really becomes that guy. By the way, he did have a top 24 performance last year where he was wide receiver, I believe it was 23 in week 11. So it's not like we are just wish casting something that is totally unrealistic. He's still a guy with great pedigree, top 15 NFL draft pick. And he did all this like while still playing less than 69% of the team snaps in those games. Nice. I beat you to it. Beat you to it, David. If we want to like jump into all the analytics and stuff, like we could talk about his 0.31 fantasy points per route run. That was better than Terry McLaurin and Garrett Wilson and Adam Thielen and Marquise Brown. There's a world. That's all I'm saying, is that there is something that we do have to recognize, that Jameson Williams is talented. The opportunity is there. The offense is good. Okay, we see Josh Reynolds now in Denver. That's 3.8 targets out the door per game. Really, the only competition is Khalif Raymond, who has been on that team. We know what he is, and Donovan Peoples-Jones, who got traded and didn't really surpass Jameson Williams in terms of the playing time. So there's something that's realistic here where in a good offense with, let's say Jameson Williams goes from 3.5 targets per game to 5 targets per game, maybe even 6 targets per game. Like, let's get totally nuts here. You're looking at a guy who's doing very similar things to what Jordan Addison was able to do last season for the Vikings and what George Pickens has been able to do in spurts for the Steelers. Not a must-draft guy by any means, but I think he is someone that should be rising up our ranks. We should be paying attention to him, and we should be watching him all throughout training camp here for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I'm not going to push back. I mean, he's getting drafted right now as like wide receiver 48 or 49, I believe. Like, you're getting him super, super cheap in drafts, and the upside is there. So I'm okay drafting Jameson Williams at cost.
You almost sound sad that you couldn't push back.
He's like, fine.
Well, it's just there's a lot of red flags, but it's easy to write that off as like, well, he was drafted coming off of a torn ACL, and then in year 2, he missed half of the season to a gambling suspension. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about how terrible his production profile has been so far, because I think that there is a healthy dose of context that you can add to all of his woes so far. So I'm just willing to kind of look at him as the prospect that I liked coming out of Alabama 2 years ago and still hold on to those priors going into year 3.
Yeah, the context you mentioned there, Dave, is really important. Julia, Jameson Williams, where do you feel like he should be?
I think he is a riser as well. Look, I think the Detroit Lions have they're set up fantastically this season. I think they only have 3 games outside. I think like we've seen how great Jared Goff is inside in a dome, and
they're starting the season with 8 straight dome games.
I mean, I tweeted something that Jared Goff likes being inside more than a woman who just had a fresh chemical peel. Like this is the numbers are there, and so if you're getting him that late, like this is someone who could have like a 2 touchdown, 150-yard game, right? I think he's a great best ball option. Like you could hit there for sure. And all you need, I don't want to put it out there as an injury, but all you need is an injury, and then he rolls right in and he could be your wide receiver 1 there. I think he's great where he's going. Yeah.
I love it. When there's not much left to say, just yeah, we did it. Well, guys, we went through 9 of these players that are rising up our rankings. And whether we agreed or we didn't, I think we can all say that these players are good values. These are players that our viewers and listeners should be targeting in their drafts. Now, the next episode we're going to do is not going to be as kind. Those are going to be the players that are dropping down in our fantasy football rankings. That's just going to be filled with negativity. So make sure you tune into that one. It's going to be a lot of fun. And make sure that you subscribe to the daily news updates from Football Guys. We'll have the link in the description down below for both YouTube and the audio podcast. Everything you need to win in your fantasy football leagues, that's going to be sent to your email straight to you every day by the man himself, Joe Bryant. For myself, for Dave Kluge, for Julia Papworth, our fantastic guest, I want to thank you all for watching and listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.